Now, from the Pope John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome to The World Over Live. Thanks so much for being here. My first guest is a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center here in Washington. He's a theologian and author of Witness to Hope, the biography of Pope John Paul II. Earlier this month, the second volume of his biography of the late pontiff was finally released. It's entitled The End and the Beginning, Pope John Paul II, The Victory of Freedom, The Last Years, The Legacy. I spoke to George Weigel recently about the new book and what it adds to the legacy of Pope John Paul II. Take a look. George, the new book covers the last 6 years of Pope John Paul II's life. Why was it necessary to devote a whole volume to this and not just add a few chapters to the previous book?
Shortly before Christmas 2004, I had dinner with John Paul II in the papal apartment, a habit we had formed some years before. And I said to him on that occasion, Holy Father, if you don't bury me, I want to assure you that I will finish the job I began in 1995. And he indicated that he was grateful that that would happen. So this was a promise I had made to him that I would finish the story. And when I first began to conceive this book, that's what I thought of it as being. The last 6 years, which are not accounted for in Witness to Hope, which of course include the extraordinary events of the Great Jubilee of 2000. And then I would conclude with a large-scale evaluation of the man and his achievement.
And those two parts of the book are here, but there's something else that precedes it now.
That's right, because in the course of working on this over the past decade, through the help of some Polish colleagues, historians, I came into the possession of some remarkable secret police files from the Polish secret police, classified cables from the Polish Foreign Ministry during the communist period, reports to the East German Stasi, Hungarian secret police stuff, transcripts of conversations in the White House bearing on martial law in Poland. So there was an abundance of new material with which to revisit the utterly dramatic story of Karol Wojtyła versus communism for 40 years.
No,
from
this
1946
as the
through
book tells
1989.
The secret police are shadowing him starting in the 1950s. Why did he come onto the radar that early?
Every seminarian in Poland during the communist period, going back to 1946, as he entered the seminary, not only had a file in the secret police archives, but he had someone watching him. The unbelievable investment of money and manpower that communist regimes put into trying to impede the work of the Catholic Church, to suborn Catholics into cooperation and collaboration, to destroy the reputations of priests and bishops, was simply colossal. Now we can document this, although it has to be said a fair amount of the documentation went up the smokestack in early 1989 when things were about to change. There are still in the Polish Institute of National Memory in Warsaw 120 miles of files. If you line these files up one by one, they would stretch for 120 miles. And that includes an extraordinary amount of material on the communist assault on the church and on Wojtyła. So I've been able to pick with these Polish colleagues some of the more intriguing materials from this vast archive and tell this story
It's
again.
interesting the way Karol Wojtyła sees this struggle, this epic struggle between communism and the faith. He doesn't see it in political terms at all. He sees it and he describes it to a group of, at a reunion of priests in 1974, He says, I hear the answer that it was these times of great struggle between good and evil, times of the great struggle between Mary and Satan that draw many into the priesthood so that they might participate in the great battle fully, decisively, in a defined manner. Did he see his priesthood, indeed his pontificate, as an engagement to battle, if you will, spiritual battle?
You know, Raymond, as I wrote in Witness to Hope, I think the Second World War was the decisive, formative experience in Wojtyła's life, in his decision to accept the call to the priesthood, and in the way he conceived the priest as a defender of the dignity of the human person. Not simply the defender of the dignity of believers, but the defender of the dignity of the human person. In the new book, I'm able to show how, against extraordinary opposition, attempts to suborn his colleagues, the bugging of his residents, him being followed not only at public events, but when he goes on vacation.
When he goes to Vatican II, you've got people infiltrating the council itself.
The council itself was penetrated by communist secret police agencies, as was indeed the Curia. This was an extraordinary effort to deal with what Polish communism understood to be the main ideological enemy. And while I don't want to over-dramatize this, because the late Pope did not want to over-dramatize it, it was dramatic. And as now Cardinal Dziwisz of Krakow, the Pope's longtime secretary, said to me many years ago, what you have to understand is that it was we and they, us and them, all the time. This was nonstop, 24/7 conflict. And that's a very dramatic story, which I think we have been able in this book to add some remarkable new documentation.
One gets the feeling this is a very isolated, if you will, lonely existence. It's really just the Pope and Cardinal Dziwisz, at the time Father Dziwisz, together. And he only puts his faith and shares his counsel and confidence with a very small group of people. Talk about the fact that none of the meetings, he didn't keep notes with the Vatican Secretary of State, I imagine to avoid detection by the secret police.
When Cardinal Wojtyła was elected Pope in 1978, he had, I think, reason to believe that there had been an extensive communist effort to penetrate the Leonine Wall, get inside the Vatican, recruit moles, plant moles.
Using blackmail and all sorts of
all
devices.
Sorts of things. Blackmail, bribery, appeals to divisions and rivalries and whatnot. And I think he had reason to believe that the archives of the Secretariat of State, where the archives of the pontificate of the moment are kept. They're not in the secret archives, they're right next door, so to speak, in the Secretariat of State for easy retrieval, were not secure. And so virtually nothing that touched on these questions, for example, the Pope's meeting with Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko, would be dictated in an aide-memoire and filed. Rather, the Pope and Cardinal Dziwisz, as he now is, Monsignor Dziwisz as he was then, would meet every night in the papal apartment and go over the day's conversations. And Dziwisz kept notes of the main themes of the conversations, who was seen, what was talked about, etc. And all of that remained inside the papal apartment, where no one had access. What this means, among other things, is that 70 years from now, when the archives of the pontificate of John Paul II are available for scholars, they're going to be somewhat dull. They're going to be somewhat dull on this set of questions, because there is going to be, I think, very little in the paper. Now, there may be some paper from the so-called Vatican Foreign Ministry that's of interest, etc. But in terms of the Pope's materials himself, All of that was held very closely, I think, because of a legitimate concern, not an over-nervous concern, that the Vatican was not secure and, in fact, did not have a very sophisticated counterintelligence capability at all.
Now, when he becomes Archbishop of Krakow, he's identified at the time as a dangerous ideological opponent. Yet, the regime approves his appointment, and they had some control at the time over those appointments. Why would they do so?
It's an interesting question to which there's probably no definitive answer. I think ultimately it may have been because they believed their own baloney. Namely that ideas are ephemera, that this man is an intellectual,
he's a
poet, he's a philosopher, he doesn't know how to play the game the way the big boys play it. There was ample evidence that this was false. They had already invested tens of thousands of man-hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars in trying to bring him down one way or another. But I think ultimately it may have been because they just believed their own stuff. There may also have been some questions of rivalries between the Communist Party apparatus and the secret police apparatus at work in this. We're never going to know for sure, but it was a colossal mistake from their point of view.
Tell me about this independent group D. What was their intention, and how did John Paul operate in spite of them?
There was, in the 1970s, established within the department of the secret police that dealt exclusively with the church, which had existed for decades. This independent group D, which was charged with, quote, the disintegration of the Catholic Church. This included everything from ramped-up efforts to find collaborators, to attempts to suborn clergy and bishops. Ultimately, these characters, when John Paul II was Pope, would attempt a blackmail plot by concocting a diary, totally fictional, in which a woman who had once worked in the archdiocesan offices claims that she had had an affair with the cardinal. Crazy stuff.
And they forged the diary.
They forged the diary and tried to plant it. The guy who was in charge of this a year later was the guy who murdered Father Papiłuszko, now Blessed Jerzy Papiłuszko. This was a very, very nasty and serious game.
Did John Paul ever share with you in your conversations with him how he managed to operate and separate, if you will, this constant opposition, being spied upon, residences bugged, you're not knowing if the people coming to you are plants or not, and your spiritual mandate as head of this church?
Well, I think he was, in fact, in a much freer position in Rome than in Krakow. I mean, in Krakow, if you wanted to talk about things that had a certain political resonance or connotation, you just go outside the building and take a walk around that wonderful plenty, that greensward around the old city of Krakow, where people would be watching you, but they wouldn't have microphones in the ceiling or in the chandeliers or wherever the microphones were. And I think people just got used to living that way. I mean, that after you do that for a while. Yeah. It was a bit different in Rome. I think the Pope had control of his own environment in the Apostolic Palace, and particularly in the papal apartment, more than he did, although, as I indicate in the end and the beginning, he felt utterly cut off for the first few days after martial law was declared in December 1981, because the phone lines were cut. He had no way to get hold of anybody in Poland. And it's only after Christmas, really, that he begins to get real information that allows him to know what precisely is going on in his homeland.
Tell us about the 9 days when he returns that first time, 1979.
Correct. June 2nd to 10th, 1979.
First of all, I love the story that he wanted to originally come in May. For what, 2 days, 3 days?
It's going to be a 3-day trip in May. It was going to center on the feast of St. Stanisław. Communists couldn't have that because Stanisław is sort of the Becket of Poland. We can't have that kind of church.
And the big Marian feast day.
So they end up trading 3 days in May for 9 days in June. And I think as the history of the 20th century comes into clearer and clearer focus, those 9 days were a pivot on which the history of the 20th century turned, every bit as much as the guns of August 1914 or the beginning of the Second World War in early September 1939. Things turned in a dramatic and fundamental way. And the Pope did that not by talking about politics, not by arguing economics, but by giving back to his people, whom he knew so well, their authentic history and culture, which is to say their authentic identity. And by giving them that, he gave them tools of resistance that communism simply could not match.
And this really is the through line from the time he's a young man as an actor in the Rhapsodic Theater, this notion of culture and history and sharing that with people, and that raising up the human person and protecting the rights of the human person.
This is why Wojtyła is a world historical figure. I mean, he's a great Catholic figure. I believe he'll be a saint someday. He's one of the greatest popes in history. But he is also a world historical figure because for the first time since the French Revolution and since the rise of Marxism in the mid-19th century, someone demonstrated that the world is not run by politics or by economics or by some combination of politics and economics. That over the long haul of human history, the most dynamic force is culture. And at the heart of culture is cult. What people believe, what people worship, what people are willing to stake their lives and their children's lives on. And he deployed that understanding to bend history in a more humane direction.
Let's speed ahead to the centerpiece of this new book, The Jubilee Year, and his vast vision of what this was, what it would achieve. Okay, George, I covered almost every one of those Jubilee. I mean, I've got the bags under my eyes to prove it. All of them. The Jubilee for jugglers, the Jubilee for cooks, the Jubilee for everybody. What was his intention with the Jubilee Year, and was it fulfilled?
I think the first thing to be said about the Great Jubilee of 2000 is that it simply would not have happened the way it did without John Paul II. When he broached this idea in 1994 to an extraordinary consistory of cardinals, he got a very, very chilly reception. I think people thought it was simply impossible in this world to pull off a year-long global celebration of Christian faith,
culminating in the opening of a door.
Beginning and ending.
Yeah, that's right.
The opening and closing of the door. And he insisted that this could be done, and it was by sheer force of conviction, his conviction, that he made it happen. He wanted to make the world look closely at the stuff of its redemption. And that's why the centerpiece of the Jubilee for him was the Holy Land pilgrimage.
Right.
This is not a story. This is not a fairy tale. Stuff happened at a place in a certain time, and the world changed because of that. Our redemption is a matter of things happening to real people in real places, and he was determined to show the world.
And I love in the book, the end and the beginning, George's new book on the life of John Paul II, really the sequel to Witness to Hope. In it, you talk about that great moment where he begs his hosts in Israel to allow him to go back to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I don't want to ruin it by telling people anymore, but it was a nice moment where you sort of tied in the ministry, the vision, all of it. And it's just a beautiful moment of many in this book. Let's talk for a moment about the sex abuse crisis, George. This is kind of, if you will, if there's a shadow on the papacy of John Paul II, this is the one people most often reference. Why and how didn't he realize the depth and the gravity of the sex abuse crisis and the episcopal malfeasance on all sides when it was so apparent to goofy journalists in the America?
I think the first thing that has to be said about this, Raymond, in justice, is that John Paul II was a great reformer of the priesthood. He came to Rome in 1978 at a moment of intense crisis in the Catholic priesthood. a 15-year period in which more priests had left the active ministry than at any time since the Reformation in the 16th century, in which the idea of the priesthood had become deeply attenuated. And he put 25 plus years into the reform of the priesthood. He had a synod on the priesthood, on priestly formation. He wrote a post-synodal apostolic exhortation that dramatically changed the dynamics of seminaries around the world, particularly in the United States.
And most importantly, he showed us the power of the priesthood in his own witness and example.
Which attracted to the ministry of the Catholic Church the kind of people who simply would not engage in the abuse of anyone, sexual or otherwise. So I think 200, 300 years from now, the summary judgment on John Paul II and the Catholic priesthood is that he was a great reformer of the Catholic priesthood. There is also no question that in 2002, the Holy See and the Pope were about 4 months behind the real-time news curve of what was happening in the United States. You and I think, have discussed this before when my book, The Courage to be Catholic, came out, and I began to unravel this for people. There was a very bad flow of information back to the Holy See from the United States. And then when the Pope was finally given documentation that laid out the magnitude of this, the fact that it was not a media-generated hysteria, there were real problems here that had to be addressed, he moved very quickly to address those problems. But there is no question that he experienced this in a different time frame than we did in 2002. We were in April, and he was in January. And because of this intense 24/7 communications environment in which we live, to which the Vatican to this day has not caught up or caught on, I think he was blindsided in a serious way. Confronted with the evidence, he acted decisively and said, in I think what remains the sharpest line articulated on this, there is no room in the priesthood for those who would abuse the young.
Now, George, you were there during that time. I mean, you were an intimate of the Pope at this period. What was his personal reaction to this?
I think he was deeply, deeply wounded by this. He had invested his own entire life in lifting up a heroic image of the priesthood. It was, in some sense, inconceivable to him that people could behave in this way. I think it's also true that he was conditioned by his experience in Poland, which we talked about a moment ago, in which charges of sexual impropriety were regularly used by the communists to attempt to bring down good priests, to be initially skeptical about these kinds of charges. And I think the other facet of this is he simply could not believe, or found it very difficult to believe, although eventually he had to come around to acknowledge it, that bishops could be so foolish in a sense, trading the vocabulary of psychotherapy for the vocabulary of right and wrong. This was a terrible, terrible burden for him. And anyone who suggests that this man did not feel the anguish of victims, the anguish of the people of the church, over the failure of the leaders of the church, simply has no idea of the kind of man Karol Wojtyła was.
There is so much more to get into this book, the end and the beginning. Pope John Paul II, The Victory of Freedom, The Last Years, The Legacy, George Weigel's sequel to Witness to Hope. George, final question. Inevitably, biographers leave a piece of themselves, I think, with their subjects and take something from their subjects. After this long, long time spent in John Paul's presence, absorbing his word and his world, what has he left you with, and what do you most miss about him personally?
Well, obviously, in personal terms, I miss his company. I mean, this was a great part of my life for more than 15 years. And while he, in a sense, asked me to judge him, and therefore there was always going to be an analytic, critical edge to what I did. This is not hagiography. No. Witness to Hope was not hagiography. He was a wonderful human being to spend time with. So I miss that. And yet I come away from that immensely grateful for the example of a life lived to the full, of the high adventure of Christian discipleship. And I hope that's had some impact on keeping me up and running over the past decade and a half. And those are memories, and that is an inspiration that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. He also introduced me to a network of his own friends, particularly back in Poland, who are now among my closest friends and with whom I am still in regular conversation about him, and some of whose stories I can now bring to the public in the end and the beginning for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope you'll be up and running for much longer. George Weigel, thank you
Thanks,
for being
Raymond.
here. The End and the Beginning is available at bookstores everywhere and through EWTN's religious catalog. You can find out more about the Ethics and Public Policy Center and read all of George's columns by visiting eppc.org. When we return, an encore of my recent interview with actor Robert Duvall. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
My next guest is a Hollywood legend. Since his breakout role as Boo Radley in the 1962 classic To Kill a Mockingbird, he's inhabited an array of unforgettable characters in films such as MASH, The Godfather 1 and 2, Apocalypse Now, and his Oscar-winning turn in 1983's Tender Mercies. He was nominated for an Emmy for his work as the wise old Texas Ranger in 1989's Lonesome Dove, and in the late 90s he wrote, directed, and produced and starred in a very personal film called The Apostle. His portrayal of a deeply flawed Southern preacher was filled with themes of faith, forgiveness, and redemption that are often prevalent in his best work. Robert Duvall's latest film, Get Low, which opened earlier this summer, continues in that vein. In it, he plays a hermit who comes out of a 40-year exile in order to make peace with his past. I had the privilege of interviewing Mr. Duvall recently at his home in Northern Virginia. Here's a clip from Get Low and an encore presentation of my exclusive interview with Robert Duvall.
And I want to be there.
You will be, I guarantee you.
I want to be there now.
You want to be at your funeral party alive?
Yes, sir.
But you can't have a funeral if you're not, deceased.
Hold on now. It's a detail. We can look at it.
Pretty big detail.
You want to have a funeral party while you're alive so you can go.
Yes or no?
Yes. Buddy, get some paper. We need to make a list of who Mr. Bush wants to invite.
Now, sit down there. I want everybody to come who's got a story to tell about me.
Let's talk for a moment about this film and this character. Felix Bush strikes me as a lot like Boo Radley.
No, not at all.
Well,
Not at all.
but they're
Everybody
they're
says
hermits.
that. Not even close.
Okay, what's the
To me,
difference?
not even close. The difference being this guy could have been a lawyer, a teacher. He could have been a world traveler. He could have been, whatever. He could have been many things, but he chose to be a recluse. But
He's a self-exiled
yeah,
recluse.
self. Boo Radley was a little off,
But there is a tenderness beneath the expectation that the world has of these people
Yeah.
that I think is in common.
Yeah.
That there's much more beneath the surface than the world sees.
Yeah, Exactly.
in both of these men.
Well, and also, this is like a Horton Foote movie, and he didn't live long enough to see it. I wanted him to see it, but he died right before we started it.
Yeah.
No, during the scene, I'm giving the speech.
In front of everybody at the end.
The first day when I did it for them, my wife's off camera. She gets a message that Horton Foote just passed away during the death scene. Wow. She got goosebumps. It was full circle for To Kill a Mockingbird, all the things I did with Horton until that point. Dealing with death, he was like he was there.
You have such a long relationship with him.
Yeah.
And every project, I would argue, the ones that you've poured your heart and soul in and have been directly involved in, are Horton Foote-esque in the sense that
this was very much that way.
You have people who the world often forgets or doesn't want to think about, and yet the depth of their lives, the eternal realities that they deal with every day in small ways, is apparent.
Exactly.
Do you sense that? Do you have a sense of that? That you're drawn to that material?
Yeah, I'm drawn to many things. I played Stalin.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he wasn't exactly a tender character.
I played Adolf Eichmann. But so I played different parts and military guys, but certain parts do have that strain of humanity throughout. That's very appealing as a performer and very appealing to a certain portion of the public.
Would you say that you're drawn to Southern stories more than others?
Could be. I mean, I was attached to this, and then it got off track, and they brought Charlie Mitchell in from Alabama to put those touches that made it like a Southern tale. It was wonderful.
There's a redemptive sensibility in this movie and in all the best parts that you've really, I think, become renowned for, if you'll permit me to say. Do you, as an actor, are you drawn to characters that have a sense of redemption in them and tales that are redemptive?
It happens to be that, but I don't think about it consciously or intellectually. It's just something I
but you're drawn to it nonetheless.
Yeah, well, yeah, interesting characters, absolutely.
I mean,
as long as there's drama and contradictions, and they're not all one thing. They're not all one thing.
Speaking of drama and contradictions, one of my favorite films, I think my wife and I saw it 4 times, was The Apostle.
Yeah, exactly.
And this you wrote, you directed, you starred in.
Right. I financed
you financed, you paid the bill.
Exactly.
And therein, I mean, there are a handful of films that I think I could name, and I dare anybody else to name, that have the sense of contradiction and truth to a character, yet reveal that redemption beneath. The Apostle is littered with that, Robert.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, talk to us about the opening scene of The Apostle.
The opening scene came from, I knew a woman whose mother was a Pentecostal preacher, and she was pretty, what she did was she would get premonitions about car wrecks and highway wrecks, and would literally go down and get in the scene and preach the stoppage of blood. That quote from the Old Testament. So that's exactly, that's where I got that whole thing from.
Now listen to me now. There are angels, even in this automobile at this precise moment. He has sent his angels here to watch over you. Now, do you accept him here today?
Yeah.
Thank you,
Hey,
Jesus.
mister.
Thank you, Jesus.
You have to get out of there. You can't be in there. You hear me?
Yeah. Now,
Let's go.
When that ambulance gets you in there on your way, you're going to fly down the highway. Lord's going to have a whole flock of his angels lead you on that
Come on,
highway.
get out.
He's going to go all the way with you. You've taken the Lord today. He's going to go all the way with you because you both are his champions here today. Praise God.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Don't have to thank me, son. Thank our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. You're in his hands now. Bless you both. Bless you both. Whenever 2 or more gathered in my name, there will I be also.
Mister, I'm sorry about this, but you got to go back to your car. You can't be out here. You're not allowed here.
I understand that.
I guess you think you accomplished something in there, huh?
I know I did.
What?
All I know is I did not put my head through that window in vain.
Well, how would you know that?
Well, I'm going to tell you. I'd rather die today and go to heaven than live to be 100 and go to hell.
So that whole script was from stories, true stories that happened within that community.
But you traveled around. You were doing documentaries in the South, in the Appalachian territory. I mean, you almost organically stew this material for a long time.
Absolutely, because I love the black preachers.
Oh, you have nothing like them.
Oh, they're one that likes the surrogate father figure to the people of their community. So yeah, I did research all over America, Los Angeles, the South, Texas, many times.
One of the things I love about that opening scene, because you see he rushes into a car wreck, he prays over this couple, and you see what appears to be a miracle happening there.
Yeah.
Why did you put that in? Because a lot of people, even now, seeing that film, say, "Oh, this guy's just a phony. He's coasting on his ability to talk."
No, he's not a phony.
But that kind of contradicts that.
I mean, everything's percentages. And a lot of these television preachers that start out very sincere, they go adrift.
They drift.
But there's a percentages of what's still spiritually valid and what offsets that. The guy's not a phony. I'll tell you this, and I will challenge these people. He's less of a phony than King David, that wrote the Psalms that we worship and adhere to, who sent a man off to die so he could have the wife. My guy didn't do that. He killed the guy out of like out of an impulse, really. So he's not a phony, really.
No. He struggled, and you see him struggling with that call on his life.
Yeah, exactly.
And at the end, in the prison,
exactly.
he's still preaching to these guys, finding redemption and sharing it with others.
Exactly.
Do you sense that in yourself, that struggle with faith?
Everybody has it. Everybody has it. Yeah, everybody has it. Yeah.
I mean, when I look at the body of your work, the whole corpus, there is a humanity, an understanding, but beneath it is this, maybe preoccupation is too strong a word, but a sense of the eternal, and that even in our mundane lives, the eternal is always here.
My kind of one of my thrusts is that we all have our journey from the cradle to the grave, and we try to do what we can do without stepping on too many toes. And my only disagreement I may have with some of these religious people, about being saved. You will not go to heaven.
Once saved, always saved.
Yeah. To me, the day of judgment is not now. It's on the other side of the grave. And how can a human preacher say you're either going to go to heaven or you're not going to go to heaven? It's on the other side of the grave, the day of judgment.
It's a work in progress until
Absolutely.
that gavel comes down.
What's on your mind, sir?
About time for me to get low.
To get what?
Down to business. Yeah. I need a funeral.
For whom?
Me.
For you? You want to buy a funeral for you?
Am I not talking right?
I'm sorry, sir. Are you sick?
Everybody dies.
All right. I see. Well, sir, the church can help you get your affairs in order. Arrange a service for you.
Well, what would you say?
About what?
Me.
Eulogy. Well, I don't know. What do you want me to say?
Say what you say right now to my face.
Well, Mr. Bush, I don't know much about you. I've heard stories, but...
What stories?
Just stories, people talking.
What kind of stories? Say one.
Well, sir, my mother used to say that gossip is the devil's radio. What matters is that when you come to the end of your life, that you're ready for the next one. Now, have you made peace with God, sir?
I paid.
Mr. Bush, you can't buy forgiveness. It's free, but you do have to ask for it.
One of the things I loved about Get Low, first of all, tell me about that title, Get Low. What's your read on that?
Well, if you ask the director and everybody involved with this, they'll have a different answer. To me, to get as specific as I can, I think get low is to get down. Get down for Jesus. Get down. You're still above the ground, but you get low and find your sense of humility or whatever to get down to the basics, down to spiritual business.
And this character you play, Felix Bush, he carries this burden with him.
Yes.
I mean, he exiles himself to the woods. he carries this secret that we don't really learn until
Right.
much later. Well, how did you prepare for this role? I mean, this man's a loner, living alone in the woods. Did you cordon yourself off from friends and family?
We vacation at least once a year, usually in Argentina, where Luciano's people are from northern Argentina. And I remember that long speech and a lot of those things. I just sat facing the South American Andes, the mountains, and just contemplated and worked on it. I think working for a sense of solitude, to find that sense of solitude.
You fill these moments with this unspoken truth that isn't in the script. Nothing funny is happening in the background. It's just there.
Yeah.
How do you prepare for that?
You just do that. You just do that. You think of this, think of the character. And actually, one of the money guys from Germany, when it was all over, a German, hit it on the head that none of us had thought of. He said, this movie is a love story. It's a love story. Going back in time to the woman, everything.
Yeah, it all comes back. It comes full circle.
Absolutely.
And this notion that we have to make amends before we go. We have to confess. We have to somehow deal with the stuff of life and the mistakes we make in life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what he's done for many years, and he finds he has an illness, and before he really goes, he sets up and has his own funeral, a make-believe funeral before he has the real one, where he won't be there.
Yeah.
And this is based on it's based on a real guy, but fictionalized.
Nah, I'm not a smart man or a wise one. I don't know what kind of man I am. I was always restless. Thought I'd see the world, but I didn't go nowhere on purpose because I did something I was ashamed of, something I could never fix. Y'all probably think you know what you do or what you wouldn't, and I wish you good luck with that. I really do. When I told Charlie what I'd done, he told me to confess to God, the law, and to somebody else so as I could get forgiveness. But I didn't want forgiveness. No. I needed to hold on to what I did, to be sick from it every day of my life, so that I never told nobody else. You see, nobody.
Now, you, of course, won an Academy Award for Tender Mercies. Yeah. Another character. You find him flat, drunk, laid out at the beginning of that movie. Right. And he, too, struggles with faith, with redemption, with relationships, and finds his way out of that pit.
Right.
That journey. That
and a help from a good woman.
Right, and a little boy.
Yeah, exactly.
And a song that you wrote, a couple of songs.
A few background songs, not the main ones. Yeah,
well, but they were.
But he had a support system. When we did Crazy Heart, the part with Jeff Bridges, he didn't have a good support system. My character in the Horton Foote had a support system that helped him, which was very good.
What was it about Horton Foote's writing and work that so attracted you? I know you were friends for many, many years, and
well, I did a play of his way back about a guy that at the neighborhood playhouse where under Sandy Meisner, where I played a drunk, and it came in and it worked. Something emotional really worked for me that they gave me this part, and Horton Foote came one night with his wife and Kim Stanley and Bob Mulligan, who directed eventually To Kill a Mockingbird.
Right.
And 2 years later, when they were going to cast that movie, Lillian Foote said to Horton, his wife said, "Well, what about that young man we saw in your play at the neighborhood playhouse? He'd be very good for Boo Radley."
And that's how you got the role.
Yeah, I want to thank Horton and his wife for that.
What a moment. And,
yes.
and since you brought Sandy Meisner up, let's talk about him for a moment.
Right.
Sandy Meisner was a member of the group theater.
Right.
He was a renowned acting teacher in New York, whom you studied with. Tell me about that technique. Meisner had a very bare-bones technique in many ways.
Very bare-boned. I mean, he once told me he was easier to please than Lee Strasberg at the studio, where everything was so critical. These guys were pretty critical, so you had to have arrive at a certain sense of relaxation to work under their auspices. But Sandy, what I took from him mostly, I guess, was the way of improvise, just talking and listening, the way we're doing now.
That repetition exercise.
Yeah, that came after I was there, but that's wonderful.
Really?
But this, you know that exercise?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you work with?
You worked with?
You worked with Stanley. Yeah. No.
You worked with?
No, it wasn't there when I was there.
You worked with?
What?
What?
I know that exercise, but I never. When I was there,
You worked with?
It didn't work. Yeah, you work. Yeah.
You worked with?
Yeah, you work with.
You?
You? Me?
You?
What are you looking at?
We?
Yeah, right.
That's the exercise.
Yeah.
So it goes back and forth.
It's a form of improvisation that takes you off of the text.
You throw the text away.
Yeah, right.
Do you use that kind of improvisation?
Sometimes when I
working?
direct.
Uh-huh.
When I directed the Gypsy film, I used that, and others. But it's like, not so much. But like somebody says, the more they act as studio, the other method, they come on stage with a big bag of yesterday.
Right.
Sandy was more in the moment.
Yeah, Strasberg made you go into this memory thing of your past, and you'd bring that up.
Right.
I studied with Stella Adler, who was, had her own fixations, but it was character work.
Exactly.
And you do an enormous amount of character work.
It actually has to come back to you. Shift it a certain way. And that's what Sandy says, it's a way of doing it. Rather, people say, do you become the character? Well, that can be a danger. You can be in your head the character, and emotionally nothing's happening. So it's like, it has to, I call it from ink to behavior. When you get a part, from ink to behavior. To find that behavior that fulfills what the character calls.
And how do you do that? Do you go when you get a role? When you get a role of the Lonesome Dove, when you're playing Gus McCrae,
my favorite.
That role lands in your lap. What do? What's the first thing you do?
You read the script and find out it's such a good script, you're going to let it take you along. And McMurtry still said we should have switched parts, and I totally disagree with him.
I do too.
And what I did was, something led me, strangely, out to West Texas, and I bumped into old Sammy Baugh, the quarterback for the Washington Redskins. He didn't know who I was. We talked for like 2 hours, because the person I was with had played football under him with the Houston Oilers, Larry Elkins. And all those gestures I got in the part were from Sammy Baugh.
One of your neighbors here, whom you worked on a project with, and you cultivate these projects, Broken Trail. He, a fellow here who owns an adjoining farm, had written told you a story, and you encouraged him to write the script.
Yes.
He did. It became an AMC movie, beautiful movie.
AMC won't even pick up our phone anymore. Well, we put them on the map.
Well, that's right. You were the first film that AMC did. They should be ringing your phone.
I don't know what their deal is now,
but I love that story in that you cultivated this story attracted you. It was from the earth. It was from a man who wasn't a professional writer.
No, but he had a great sense of a great ear for dialogue. It was based on the Haythorne family, the Haythorne Land and Cattle Company of Arthur, Nebraska, who actually had a horse drive in the 20s from the west to east. And I think if you really look at it, it may be better directed, better realized in some respects than even Lonesome Dove. It was very well done.
Beautifully acted.
I think the casting was even better.
Well, one of the things I love about that is your neighbor who worked on that screenplay, Broken Trail, he said Bob Duvall collects characters.
Yeah, I've been accused of that in the past. I would like to have a character party someday. But I love to collect characters. I do, because you learn from them in life. That's your guide. That becomes your guide. Like Sammy Baugh was to a point when I did Lonesome Dove. But the script was so good that Bill Whitloff did from the novel that it just led you. It was such a wonderful character on the written page, even Augustus McCrae.
You, I know, are a huge fan of an actor you worked with famously in The Godfather, Marlon Brando.
What time does my daughter leave with the bridegroom?
In a few minutes, right after they cut the cake. Now, your new son-in-law, we give him something important.
Never. Give him a living, but never discuss the family business with him. What else?
Virgil Salazzo called. Now, we're going to have to give him a day sometime next week.
We'll discuss him when you come back from California.
When am I going to California?
I want you to go tonight. I want you to talk to this movie big shot and settle his business for Johnny. Now, if there's nothing else, I'd like to go to my daughter's wedding.
What was it about Brando? I only met him once. You had a little more familiarity with him. Tell me about Brando, what it was like working with him and what you learned from him.
Well, what I learned was when I did a movie, it wasn't a very good movie. It was a Horton Foote script initially called The Chase. I learned from him that when he was having coffee, he'd have coffee, get up, do the scene, action, cut, go back to coffee. And it was all really the same. There was a sameness. between when it was off camera and on camera.
A naturalness.
Yeah, something that's, people say, oh, he plays himself. Try it, not easy. It's not easy. And I learned that from him.
But he took great risks, and you do too. With these character choices, I mean, you look different from film to film, but it's an internal. It's not just.
It's got to be,
makeup.
And I think that he finally, not that he sold that, he got tired. He was spoiled at a young age, and I always said to him, "You should play Othello on stage." No. He said, it's boring. He didn't like, he didn't like it. And I can understand doing a play 8 times a week. And he became, maybe jaded. He didn't like his children to visit him on the set. He didn't think it's a noble profession, which I think it can be. You benefit people by doing certain parts.
Why do you do this now? You don't have to do this anymore.
No, I like it. I love it. I still like it. People offer me parts. They haven't wiped the drool yet, so why not?
Keep going.
And there's some really good parts coming my way now, if they can get the money for them.
Right. I hear you're working on La Mancha.
Yeah,
they want you to play La Mancha.
Yeah, Man from Don Quixote, which I understand recently when I was in Texas, that Larry McMurtry based some of his concepts of Lonesome Dove on Don Quixote. Somebody told me that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What else do you have in the hopper?
Well, I'm going to do a movie called 7 Days from Utopia about golf. It's kind of a nice, feel-good, kind of not a Christian movie, but a nice movie, and about golf and about, relationships. And then we're trying to get the Hatfields and McCoys off the ground. Eric Roth has written a brilliant script.
I saw that.
What a script.
I want to return to Get Low before we go. What do you want people to take away from this film?
People always ask me that, and I never know what to say. They take away whatever they get from it, a certain sense of humanity, because I don't know about message movies, but a certain sense of humanity. And like that German soccer player said, it is a love story. And none of us connected with that film had ever thought of that. It is a love story going back in time, that propelled this ill-fated love story that propelled this man to live this hermetic life of his.
It's a beautiful film. It's one of those films.
It's a lovely film, it really is.
It marks you.
It's my wife's favorite film since The Apostle.
Final question: what do you want your lasting legacy to be?
Maybe my journey from the cradle to the grave. I hope I did certain positive things without stepping on too many toes.
Well, you've certainly done it here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Get Low is playing in theaters now. It is definitely worth checking out, and probably Oscar contender, if I had to guess. Well, that's all the time we have until next week. You can find updates and the occasional commentary by following me on Twitter at twitter.com/Raymond Arroyo or on my Facebook fan page. And you can always find me at RaymondArroyo.com. The prayers and personal devotions of Mother Angelica and the entire Mother Angelica collection, including my biography of Mother, are available at bookstores everywhere and through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now.